In a world where taking personal accountability just is not the thing to do, comes a story of, you guessed it, lack of personal responsibility. So yeah, you can see the title on the screen if you're looking at it. If not, it is essentially an article about the executive producer's opinion on Netflix The Witcher, and essentially how, in his own words, they had to simplify the source materials because American audiences just were just too stupid. I'm going to paraphrase, but he could use all the nice, lovely words that he wants, but essentially he's calling American audiences stupid. And it's kind of funny because when you look at the show itself, all the simplifications that he claims they did, everything that they did to appeal to a wider audience, didn't actually net them views. So essentially, the theme of this lack of personal accountability, they just suck. They just suck. They just suck. And, you know, I'm only talking about this because this is just reason 8,020 of why I just have no interest in anything having to do with Hollywood. Because the way they think, obviously, it's obviously different. They obviously, they obviously have this image in their minds of who they are. And, for them, they live in these ivory towers, and, they are so intelligent, and they're so great, and they're so talented. And, they just cannot fathom why their work does not resonate with audiences. And they do what they think is right. They quote unquote dumb down things. And, essentially, I'm going to call BS on that. Like, it's the point of, you did a show because you wanted it to succeed. You didn't dumb anything down. You just disregarded the source material. And this isn't even anything that is like, this isn't anything that they did not own the rights to. So, with Rings of Power, you can basically say, yeah, they did not own any of the source material that would have made the show lore accurate. Like, Witcher didn't have that problem. They have the rights to The Witcher. So there was really no reason for them not to have done a good show, except they didn't care about the lore. They didn't care about the source material. What they cared about was doing what they wanted to do. And that is basically the problem. They did what they wanted to do. They wanted to, they wanted to create a show that, hit back at the problems that they saw in the world. Because of course, they fell under that same thing of, this show had to reflect the world that we currently live in, because heaven forbid a fantasy actually represent the fantasy world that the story is written in. I mean, it's is that not the point of fantasy? And I know that is a rhetorical question. I know it's a rhetorical question because the answer is obvious. A fantasy series is fantasy for a reason. The world looks like the way the creator wrote it. It's not meant to reflect the world unless that is what the author intended in the first place. But of course, I digress because essentially, I'm finding it interesting how they insist on writing away their own failures. Now I know to a degree, a lot of this is also them being baity. Like I'm pretty sure for the executive producer, this really is how he feels. He just feels like he doesn't understand why it didn't work. That if, that essentially it failed because they had to simplify it, even though even though they didn't have to actually simplify it, because it's the point of your it's a show that's obviously supposed to be for the fans, because you're going to have an audience of the fans, but you essentially killed any reason for an actual audience to watch it, because you made up an audience in your mind and called it a general audience that you just felt were stupid, which basically said you didn't want to do a good show in the first place. Because, okay, like looking here, for him being upset about some of the criticism. So, if you're not watching, here's the quote. Some people criticize the show for making up weird plots that changed what worked well in the books. But when you start discussing it, it usually turns out that screenwriters thought this solution out, that it's not completely crazy. But the problem becomes, if people are criticizing your situations because they didn't work, then your screenwriters, no matter what excuses your screenwriters give, it failed as a work. And that, I mean, essentially that is really kind of the problem. This failure that we're just seeing consistently in Hollywood is because they're producing bad work, which is why we currently have, the strikes in the first place, because they're not producing good work. So they're not making money, because people are not watching these shows. People are not going to the movies. People are not doing things that Hollywood needs for people to do. And they don't seem intent on actually giving people what they want. And I can't remember when this was. I think it was probably last year, where one of the top movies was actually a rom-com with a rom-com. I think it was with Julia Roberts and George Clooney. I think I didn't watch it. I never saw any advertisements for it, so don't quote me on it. But I but I remember seeing an article or hearing something about it, and essentially the case being because it was a traditional rom-com movie, and that's why it ended up becoming a success. And that's the problem. I can't remember when is the last time I went to the movies. I can't even remember when was the last time I was excited to go to the movies, because at this point, nothing looks interesting. It all looks like trash. And the movie theaters are way too expensive to go to watch movies that I just am not interested in. And so, I know that I kind of harp on this, but it really is becoming a problem that Hollywood in particular, and obviously you cannot rely on the people that they're hiring, because the people that they're hiring clearly they're activists. They're not creators. They're activists. They're people who are wanting to make a social statement, not a product. They're not trying to make a show. When you look at things like Rings of Power, when you look at even Wheel of Time, when you look at the current fantasy shows that are around, there's a reason that no one is really looking at them. But when you look at like House of the Dragons, there's a reason people gravitated to House of the Dragons. And that's because the story, they actually cared about the story that they presented. Like that was really clear. And so it isn't the kind of thing of you need to dumb down the work or you need to cater to a general audience. Like those are just excuses for why things fail. The real problem that I'm seeing in Hollywood is this idea that they still have that creating controversy, saying stupid things, sending their actors out there to say stupid things, trying to generate a kind of negative buzz. Like they still think that stuff works, but it doesn't work because you're not producing anything that a general audience member would want to watch. And all that's happening is when I see things like that, that basically just tells me that your product is not good. Because if your show was good, if your movie was good, you wouldn't need controversy to try to sell it. You wouldn't need to have to come out and say, oh, someone had a problem with our casting. Oh, that's because they're racist or they're sexist or they're whatever thing you could come up with. People would just gravitate toward it. Like going back to House of the Dragons, because I do remember where one of the actors, he did try making it seem like, oh, people had a problem with his casting because of his race. But then that went quiet when the show was a wild success because you didn't need it to sell it. You don't need drama to sell a show. You just need a good product. Now, whether or not House of the Dragon stays good, of course, depends on whether or not they want it to and they put the work into it. Like quality over quantity, as always. So it really kind of depends on how much they care about what it is that they're doing. Like we know Rings of Power doesn't care at all. They just think that they're smarter than everybody else. The Witcher. Clearly the biggest problem that people have with The Witcher is that they did not care. Like people can tell when you are actually excited, when the people involved are excited about what they're doing. The thing that always rubbed me the wrong way about the showrunners for the Rings of Power is that they always tried to sound as if they were excited. They always tried to sound like they were Tolkien fans, but it always read artificial to me, because they were always trying to pull out a single quote, or they were always, they were always trying to sell it as if they were these good guys who they knew what they were doing and they just loved everything about Tolkien and they just had all this reverence and you should just trust them, which when your sources always trust me, bro, there's literally no reason to trust them. And the sneak peeks that they did, the teaser trailers, the final trailer that came out, the lack of content that was in those basically proved why no one should have trusted them in the first place. The selling that people that were clear shills, even though you could look at and say this product looked like it was like the show looked like it was going to be garbage. The overselling, the idea that you had to wait. And then, not only did you have to wait, but you had to actually give it time. And then the idea that you had to be obligated to give Amazon views and you had to keep stay with the show for 2-3 seasons. It'll get better. And that was their selling point, that you just had to get through all this content. Because there was never anything that happened in that first season. Like literally nothing happened in that first season. But they wanted you to believe that you were supposed to be excited. And, if you weren't excited, then you were supposed to just continue on anyway, which means, the problem that these places are having is they kind of want people to be stupid. Because if audiences were really as stupid as they claim, to need the kind of simplifications, or let's call it what it is, bad writing that we get, if these audiences were really that stupid, then everything would be a success because they would have no standard. They would literally go to the movies because they were told it's a good movie. Just go to the movies. If they were told just see the show, they would see the show and they wouldn't care about the quality of it because they're just stupid. Like that would be like, if these Hollywood people were actually correct, if the things that came out of their mouths were actually correct, that is what we would have. But that's not what we're having. So people aren't just going, which means audiences are not as dumb as they want to make them out to be. And because they're not as dumb as, as these Hollywood people make them, or as these Hollywood people want to make them out to be, because they're not as stupid as that, we're now seeing this problem, which of course I think is a good thing. I would love for Hollywood to continue to fail, because I think that they should fail. Because if you're not going to give quality work, if you're not going to give your all to a project, if you're going to just take something because it's popular and then think that you could do whatever you want to do, then it should fail. And if it fails, they should lose money. And if they lose money, that's a good thing, because if they don't turn their ships around, then I think that they should go out of business. I have no problems with that, because you kind of get what you deserve. You get what you put into it. When you put your views, and you put your messaging, and you put your activism, and you put, things that audiences don't need in their story, when you put that stuff in there and you try to force them to accept it and say that it's good, not because the story is good, because there's usually never a story there when things like that happens. So when you're trying to tell them just swallow the message and they don't, then you should produce something that's actually quality. But they don't actually want to produce anything that's quality. Like, I think, like, one of the problems, and I'm not even going to try to say his name, because I could at least say Tomek, but I don't want to butcher his name. But I think one of the problems that he kind of had is that one of the problems that he had is that, yeah, here we go. Yes. So he did a movie, right? That is an alternate take on the Warsaw Uprising in World War II. And so, because he had a problem in that the American audience didn't understand. Now, he says it was incomprehensible. Or too complicated. I'm gonna call BS. You didn't write a good enough story. You wrote a story assuming that everyone understood the history, which is the problem. Like, which is the problem. You did not give a good story. You did not give a good story. You wrote something that you assumed would resonate with people because you wanted it to resonate. So you wrote something being high-minded. And you ignored the fact that there were going to be people, because I guarantee that there were other people in other countries that also didn't understand what you were going for. Because it makes me think of like a film student who did a experimental film and got upset because no one understood his concept. That essentially means that there's a problem with what you did. Because if it doesn't resonate, if I write a story and it does not resonate with people, that means I did not write a good story, because it did not resonate with people. It's not the audience's fault that they didn't get it. It's my fault as the creator that they didn't get it, because that means I missed something somewhere. I did not do a good enough job of presenting what was necessary. That's creativity 101. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily want to go on too long, but I kind of found this intriguing, because it just, like I said before, it is just a continued example of why Hollywood is just this really unique place right now. And there's a lot of things that I can call it, but because calling it unique is taking it really lightly right now. But I don't mind right now because it's quite fascinating what is happening. And my mind still asks the question, like it still asks the question of what's going to happen. Because I don't believe for a moment that they're actually going to get it. Like, I don't think that they're going to get it. I think we are going to see even more studios shut down because they're going to continue losing money because they're not doing anything that is worthwhile. Because, I had to ask myself, who are the audiences that they're looking for? Well, the audiences that they're looking for is this, like right now they're looking for that kind of TikTok audience. They're looking for that Zoomer audience. They're looking for them thinking that, this is the next generation. So we should present things for them. And they all seem to be activists. Therefore, if we give them, that kind of messaging, they'll flood the theaters, they'll watch the shows, and that's not happening. It's also the Twitter crowd, that the ones that you'll get hundreds of thousands of likes, you'll get all these retweets, but then you won't get the sales. You won't get the views. They will not come out to actually pay money because at the end of the day, their motivation is not seeing you succeed. Their motivation is to see the people they don't like angry. So then you lose the actual audience that you would have because you're turning around and you're saying the general audience, they're dumb. So we made things super simple and I'm going to think nothing about having insulted them. And then you tell the fans of these series, we don't need you. We don't want you because you want things to look like they should. Because let's be honest, as much as we we want these things to look like they should. If I read a series and I fell in love with the series, then it should look like I should want it. Like it should look like it's supposed to look. When Peter Jackson did the Lord of the Rings films, I think at the time, I don't know that I had actually finished Fellowship of the Ring, but I remember going to the movies and being so wowed by what I saw on screen that I hurried through the rest of the books because I wanted to know what was going to happen in book form before I saw the rest of the films. And it just, even to this day, those films still hold up. So that is how something was supposed to be. And there was a time that we had that stories done the way that they were supposed to be. You had a story that was quality. You had a story that, yes, while you understood that some necessary changes had to happen. So you couldn't, because you can't have a play-by-play of the book. I think that's kind of one of the reasons that the newer sort of Harry Potter films didn't do so well, like the prequel films, why they kind of didn't do well because it was much more book format than it was actually movie format. So yeah, like in a book, you can have a lot of scenes that have explanations and you can have, people in rooms talking and, and things like that, but you can't necessarily have that in a film. You have to have a natural flow of action. So yes, there are some changes that always will need to be made when you're adapting something from book to film or book to TV. But to just completely ignore everything that came before and then to say that you had to do it is the height of arrogance. It really is the height of arrogance because, like the point of this whole thing, you are denying your own accountability because you're essentially saying The only reason it didn't work is because of the audience, not because of us. Because, I mean, Rings of Power is most definitely doing that. They're not at fault for the failure of the first season. Like, they are not the ones that failed. It's the audience that failed. The audience did not live up to the creators' expectations. Like, you weren't a good audience. That's why it didn't fail. But they're also not going to say that it ever failed because, well, the conversations we were having behind the scenes is that, oh, this was just like the greatest thing ever. Even though the evidence shows that it was not the greatest thing ever, and they lost quite a few views. So, yeah, I'm probably am going to end this here because, I obviously am quite passionate about this topic, and I don't want to keep going on. But yeah, it just is a fascinating time, and it just is a fascinating thing. And this article in particular from Bounding into Comics was just really fascinating to me because it just stunk of lack of accountability. And that's kind of it. So if you made it this far through the video, thanks for listening and thanks for watching. And of course, please do all the things that YouTube likes. As always, I have my Patreon linked in the description. Give it a look if you feel like it. And with that, I will see you on the next video. Bye.